Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be talking through 5 names that I see as must-draft players here in the first 4 rounds or so of 2022 redraft leagues. These are players that I think are very good values at their current ADP and have a chance to hit on their draft positions and potentially exceed the draft capital investment that you're needing to put into them at this point in time. We'll be posting a lot more videos similar to this one throughout the offseason, so if you're new around here, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for a video or miss a future episode here on the channel. Additionally, if you have any fantasy questions, feel free to put those in the comment section below. Join the community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. It's free to join, takes just a couple clicks, and then you can get in there. We're creating fantasy leagues in that server this offseason, talking fantasy football, answering questions, all that great stuff. So go check that out. But without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive into our first must-draft player in rounds 1 through 4. Alrighty, here we go. So for the most part, we're going to be staying away from round 1 in today's video. We will kick things off here with a player being drafted in the early second round, but for the most part, we'll keep the round 1 discussion for another video. I think it's more beneficial and useful of our time here to talk through some players in rounds 2 through 4, because if you hit on these players in your drafts, there is a very good chance with the quality of talent, the volume at play here, you could hit on some pretty big pieces and land yourself one of your league-winning assets for this season. So Ceedee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys is going to be one of the first receivers that I'm most interested in the second round of drafts this year. His ADP is currently 14.3, so if you're talking about in terms of draft position where that's going to be at in a 12-team league, that's going to be roughly the second or third pick in the second round of your drafts. I see a lot of volume and potential to increase the upside of Ceedee Lamb's game here, because this is a player since he came to the National Football League that we've talked about as having the talent of one of the premier receivers in the game. There's a reason that he was a first-round draft pick back in 2020 by the Dallas Cowboys. I thought very highly of him coming out of Oklahoma. And in that draft class, which was incredibly loaded from your Justin Jeffersons to your Jerry Jeudy's of the world, and of course Ceedee Lamb, who, you know, after the landing spot in Dallas, many had Ceedee as their wide receiver 1 in that 2020 draft class. And his production to this point just hasn't quite scraped the surface of what I think his legitimate ceiling is. Last year, he had 120 targets, albeit he only had 79 receptions, 1,102 yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. So there's a lot of room for growth here. That's fantastic. Ceedee's been putting up good numbers, but he hasn't really found himself in a situation where he's been in what I would categorize as an elite volume position. 120 targets is great, don't get me wrong, but when you're talking about elite NFL receivers, your Cooper Kupps, your 2019 Michael Thomases, your Devontae Adams last season, 169 targets. You're talking about 150 plus. This is what we're seeing, guys who aren't nearly as talented as Ceedee Lamb, like a Deontay Johnson, putting up 150 plus target seasons. Your A-Robs, who, don't get me wrong, I love both of those players. But Ceedee has the talent and the upside as a prospective athlete to take those numbers to the next level. And when you're getting him after Devontae Adams, after Tyreek Hill, who may have already seen their fantasy peaks in terms of their individual seasons of having the most success, you're getting him after your Cooper Kupps, your Justin Jeffersons, your Jamar Chases, who are going to be elite players, fantastic options this year. But Ceedee has the chance to enter himself into that category and be thought of as one of those players at a significantly, for, you know, the top of the draft board, a significantly lower price, even though it's, you know, less than a round or so of picks in between. That gap in being able to snatch someone else up in the first round and then address your top receiver position at the top of round 2, especially if you're picking on the bend there, you can address your first running back spot. Heck, if you want to go tight end and snatch up a Travis Kelce, guy who's definitely charted for a lot of targets this season, it opens up a world of opportunity for what you can do to build the rest of your lineup and the rest of your core for the upcoming season. Now, of course, if you haven't been following the NFL super closely this offseason, the reasoning I think Ceedee Lamb takes that next step forward in terms of falling into a position with lots of volume is because of the departure of both Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson from this offense. So total those two net 164 targets vacated in this Dallas Cowboys offense, something that I think is very important to note here. because that's where he's going to be able to see that increase in volume here in 2022 and take that next step forward. Now, we do have Michael Gallup, who only had 62 targets a season ago. I expect that number, if he comes back, is able to play right away, stay healthy this season, and contribute at, let's say, 75 to 80% of what he normally is, because although I expect him to be healthy out there and on the football field, we don't know if he's going to be truly his full self, because ACL injuries, Achilles injuries, you're not going to recover in day one in most scenarios, unless we're talking, Adrian Peterson level recoveries. Most players are going to take time to mentally get themselves right. And it's a bit of a longer recovery process than simply being able to be on the football field. So I apologize if that was a bit, windy and all over the place with that analysis. But Michael Gallup should see more than 62 targets last season. The reason for that number being lower is because, A, he's not a super high volume player. He's an efficient X receiver that succeeds vertically in winning routes over the top of the defense. And B, because the season was cut short due to that significant ACL injury. So it's not like Ceedee Lamb is going to absorb all of those targets. You've also got rookie receiver Jalen Tolbert, James Washington coming into this offense. Those targets are going to be divvied up and dispersed throughout this offense relatively evenly. However, what it does do is, kick the door wide open for Ceedee Lamb to have his first elite volume season in the target department. I don't think 150 targets is an absurd expectation here. I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility that he gets that marker. And if he's able to, break that touchdown barrier, become more of a red zone weapon, and have 8 to 10 touchdowns on top of, if he gets 30 more targets, I don't think it's out of play to question a 13 to 1,500 yard season. He could possibly break the 100 reception barrier. Again, only 79 a season ago, so you're talking about needing an increase in volume by 21. It's not that I'm guaranteeing all these things to happen, but he certainly has the best opportunity, again, with 103 targets vacated with the loss of Amari Cooper, and 61 targets with the absence of Cedric Wilson, who was the primary number 3 option last season for this team, especially once Michael Gallup went down. You've got yourself a world of opportunity for Ceedee Lamb, a very talented player. And again, that ADP of 14.3, the potential to get this elite of upside at that point in the draft is a fantastic scenario, as Ezekiel Elliott and that PCL injury also faded down the stretch, and we saw the rushing attempts for this team decrease on a weekly basis, because if you've been following what I've been talking over here the last few days, it's simply that pre-PCL injury, Ezekiel Elliott saw 20.25 touches per game. Post-injury, he saw his touches per game drop by about 5, and Tony Pollard's volume throughout the course of the season was virtually non-changing. He was incredibly efficient, very effective when touching the football, but the overall rushing attempts for the team after Zeke's injury dropped, whereas it was Zeke who saw that loss of 5 touches per game. And Tony Pollard's, again, his volume was basically flatlined and consistent throughout the entirety of the season, regardless of that situational change there. So the next player I want to talk about here is DeAndre Swift. We are now entering into a season where I think DeAndre has the best surrounding atmosphere for fantasy potential that he's had at this point in his NFL career. Obviously being a member of that highly, highly talented 2020 running back class. And I think he has the potential, with the exception of Jonathan Taylor, to outscore everyone from that class this season, despite how highly we think about guys like Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins, who have had their unfortunate injury circumstances, which has hurt their draft stock a little bit in fantasy. And situationally, they're not in perfect landing spots either, but you've got CEH there as well. Nonetheless, I think with the exception of JT, DeAndre Swift has the potential. He maybe could even outscore Jonathan Taylor. Who knows exactly how high the ceiling is for DeAndre Swift here. But in terms of efficiency and skill set, you've got one of the most intriguing and attractive fantasy weapons here for a player with, again, an early to mid second round ADP at the 17.2 overall selection via Underdog Fantasy. So in best ball formats, he's going right around, again, that early to mid-second round, and you're getting like the dream fantasy skill set here. What I like to think about with DeAndre Swift is he's like a more talented Austin Eckler, and we saw the damage that Eckler put up in fantasy last season. Now, Swift doesn't have a quarterback like Justin Herbert to give Detroit the ceiling of offensive production potential that Herbert gave to the Chargers a year ago. But in terms of a receiving skill set, a player who has opportunities to be used in the red zone, and a guy who can catch a pass on any given play and give you phenomenal production in the receiving department. I mean, he was number 4 in running back targets last season with 78, hit a 67.2% snap share, which ranked 8th amongst running backs. Fantastic when you consider the involvement that Jamal Williams has on this football team, and the production he had before his injury last year, and that kind of hampered his season down the stretch. I don't think a lot of people realize DeAndre Swift did almost all of his damage in the reception category for Detroit last season. He only had 617 rushing yards. When you really break that down and think about, that's just over barely 60 fantasy points produced from that category. Now, rushing touchdowns are a different conversation. Receiving touchdowns obviously not factored into this as well. But standalone value, 617 rushing yards, is no prolific number. So you're getting a guy who has a lot of room for improvement in that category, has missed games in his first 2 NFL seasons. So you're talking about a player who maybe has some risk in that category, but you've always got the potential that he could play more games than he did the season prior. Again, that's not something you necessarily want to bank on as an absolute for sure. But you've got all these things working in his favor. Again, the receiving skill set is one of the best things to have, especially in those PPR formats. And just in general, even in a standard league, while you might not get a point per reception, you're still getting that increased efficiency by getting a player out in space, increasing the yards before contact, and all of that stuff that's going to, again, contribute significantly to that efficiency category. 18.4% target share of the Detroit Lions team is also a number that is insanely attractive to me as someone who would potentially be a prospective drafter of DeAndre Swift. That was ranked number 2 amongst running backs. Now, I will address the legitimate concern that number could very well go down this season. I do think he'll still be heavily involved in the receiving game for this Detroit team. However, when you add a guy like Jameson Williams into the fold, Amon-Ra St. Brown in his second season, TJ Hawkinson, the potential for him to remain healthy for more games, or, he was out there and on the field last season, but he was very, very banged up in a lot of contests, and he, sometimes was a fantasy no-show, and would put up virtually no points. So, You're talking about the opportunity for that 18.4% target share to regress and decline. However, now you're having less defensive attention on DeAndre Swift, who arguably, until the emergence and breakout of Amon-Ra St. Brown, was very well possibly the best pass catcher in this Lions offense and the focal point outside of TJ Hawkinson of every defensive scheme and weekly game plan against the Lions. So I expect the offensive nucleus to take a step forward here and there to be more production potential. Again, I think that the ceiling and ability to produce, because of the over-top explosiveness of a Jameson Williams year 2 under this regime and coaching staff, they should take a step forward here. They also have a very underrated offensive line. I think they go across the board, 5 players who are very competent and capable starters. And you talk about having a really nice set of 2 tackles. Penei Sewell obviously has quite the ceiling. So that even, in the running back screen game, that stuff is phenomenal, but when you talk about, again, that ability to increase that rushing yardage total, those big 5 guys up front are going to help a lot in terms of creating space for Swift to run. And I think that the balance that they're able to incorporate this season because of those upgraded weapons in the receiving game should help him as well become a more efficient running back and not just a receiving weapon. So Swift, of course, there is still that Lions stigma, but I do think that things are getting better and we're progressing towards the brighter side of that situation. The next player I want to talk about here is Kyle Pitts, ADP 31.2 right now, again, via Underdog Fantasy. I think they've got the best ADP in the game right now. Pitts is someone for me that I think is screaming for tight end 1 overall production. Outside of his touchdown production as a rookie last season, his efficiency numbers were ridiculous. He was, at the top of each category in terms of yards per reception. Talking about just his overall efficiency on yards per target as well. Yards after the catch. Kyle Pitts is a complete athletic freak, and he is a beast in the open field. The one issue, again, is the fact that he only saw a touchdown scored on 1.5% of his catches. So that's 48th in the National Football League. That's, really, really bad for a player of this much talent and a guy who had over 1,000 receiving yards as a rookie on 110 targets. I was actually kind of astounded when I saw he only had 20.3% of Atlanta's target share last year, despite the fact that, you did have Calvin Ridley, but outside of that, you had Cordero Patterson and then Russell Gage, but those guys aren't necessarily commanding looks in my estimation. I would rather throw the football, let's put it this way, to Kyle Pitts than I would to those two players. Although those are two nice pieces of that offense, I was still very shocked that Kyle Pitts, and albeit he is a rookie, or was a rookie, only had 20.3% of that target share, but he was number 4 in routes run for the tight end position. That's fantastic. I mean, top 5 numbers in these efficiency categories, receiving department metrics. You can see it up on your screen for yourself. I mean, Kyle Pitts was putting up some ridiculous stats in his rookie season. He just didn't cash in fantasy because the one touchdown, I'm putting up 2 ones here, one touchdown that he was able to score in the 2021 season, which is abysmal. And he was still ranked number 10 in red zone targets with 15 of those. He only had 5 receptions in the red zone. Obviously, only was able to convert one of those for 6 points. But he's still putting up top 10 numbers in terms of the looks that he was getting in the red zone. And one of the issues I think that for me I can attribute this to is Matt Ryan. He wasn't someone that was ever able to produce elite TD numbers for Julio Jones, especially in the red zone. I remember the Falcons, especially after that Super Bowl run, really struggled with red zone offense. It's just been a narrative of their football team for years now, and we saw that greatly impact what Kyle Pitts was able to do. But you're getting Pitts here this season between the ranges of a tight end, not a tight end 3, but the tight end 3 or 4 off the board. Every once in a while, you'll see a Darren Waller or George Kittle be drafted before him. I think that's silly. I would probably take Kyle. It's kind of a hot take to say that you should take Kyle Pitts ahead of Mark Andrews, especially Travis Kelce every time. You're never going to see Kyle Pitts go before Travis Kelce because his ADP is close to the first round, and I would be shocked to see anyone reach up over a round ahead of ADP to get someone in the top 3 rounds of the board. Maybe later on that's a more acceptable thing to do, but again, I think that he has every opportunity in the world to show us a tight end 1 overall finish this year, and a lot of people will hesitate and have major concerns about Marcus Mariota's ability to deliver elite level production for him. However, I think a lot of people forget from 2016 to 2018, Delanie Walker had 300 plus target seasons in a row at age 30 plus in each of those years, and was able to be a fantasy relevant tight end each of those seasons, having over 800 yards in each of those seasons. Wasn't really an elite touchdown producer, but was somebody that was giving you very, again, legitimate numbers and was a far less talented player than Kyle Pitts. And obviously, you're talking about a guy who was in the older stages of his career. So Kyle Pitts has a lot more athleticism, youth, talent on his side than Delanie Walker had. And again, Marcus Mariota was the quarterback for those 3 seasons, starting 14 or more games in each of those years for the Tennessee Titans. And now he's the quarterback for the Falcons, expected starter day 1 this season. And I think he'll deliver just fine for Pitts while he is the starter in Atlanta. Amari Cooper is the next player I want to talk about here. So now we're starting to get, whereas Kyle Pitts, we're talking more of a 3rd round selection. Amari Cooper is going to be a guy, even in the late 4th round or so, your top 36 picks in 12-team leagues are going to be your first 3 rounds, and then 8 picks thereafter is where we see Amari Cooper going. So dang near a 5th round pick, which I think is insane value for a player who essentially, in my eyes, has a clear-cut role and path to be the number 1 receiving option for Deshaun Watson. Now, the one holdup, the one hang-up is, will Deshaun end up getting suspended? That's a very real concern. It's a very real possibility that that's the case. But if it's not, because the NFL is showing no rush in making their decision on this process here, we could see this investigation trickle into the 2023 season, and maybe then it rears its ugly head. So for this year, until we have more information, we're seeing situations similar to this, like your Jerry Jeudy's and Alvin Kamara's be treated very similar with their off-the-field issues. Now, this off-the-field issue has nothing to do with Amari Cooper. It's his quarterback, which is obviously a huge deal for a dependent position that needs that level of production from the QB spot to be able to get his numbers and to be able to put up his fantasy points. But he's walking into a situation with the best quarterback in his career, the first time he's been able to be the number one receiver in his offense since 2019 in the pre-Ceedee Lamb Dallas Cowboys era. And this is a guy with a very proven track record who hasn't really been able to cash in on elite level volume or elite level production consistently. Now, he's had ridiculously high highs because Amari Cooper's fantasy ceiling on any given week is massive because of his field stretching ability and his athleticism. But you're talking about a guy who has 5 1,000-yard seasons in his NFL career since being drafted, I believe, super high by the, at the time, Oakland Raiders. I forget what pick overall. I want to say number 4 to the Raiders, but that might be wrong. And he's walking into a situation as well where he's with a quarterback who has produced elite fantasy seasons in the 3 full years that he's been a starter for an NFL team. So DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller are those 2 names that have put up monster receiving numbers for Deshaun Watson at the quarterback spot. I'll walk you through those 3 seasons here between 2018 and 2020 for the Houston Texans at the time. And if you were to ask me, Amari Cooper is definitely not DeAndre Hopkins, but he is also, I would say, significantly better than Will Fuller. So you've got a player who can finish in between these 2 ranges of outcomes, where both of those players were able to put up wide receiver 1 level seasons, weekly production points, finishes. We'll talk about the small discrepancy in this take here with Will Fuller. But again, I think Amari Cooper on the talent spectrum of range of outcomes is somewhere in between the Will Fuller season and the D-Hop years. He's not going to finish quite as high as D-Hop did in 2018 and 2019, but he's also, I think, going to exceed expectations of Will Fuller in the 2020 season. So these were the 3 individual wide receiver 1s for Deshaun Watson's Houston Texans teams. So in those years, 2018, first true season, so Watson's coming off an ACL tear with the Texans the year prior in his rookie season. You've got DeAndre Hopkins finishing as the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy, again, in 2018. Not expecting that to happen here. Amari Cooper is not that level of player. Again, he has not had a high volume season in his career. He has 0 100 reception seasons and 0 10+ TD seasons. So these are the kind of the red flags that could prevent Amari from being a legitimate and bona fide wide receiver 1 this year. But again, we're looking at the historical track record of what Deshaun Watson's been able to deliver. In 2019, D-Hop followed up that wide receiver 1 season with a wide receiver 5 finish. And the following season, D-Hop's trade to the Cardinals, that whole David Johnson terrible trade debacle. What was it? David Johnson and a 2nd-round pick for DeAndre Hopkins. And then in 2020, you've got Will Fuller, who finished as the wide receiver 32, but on a points per game basis, finished as the wide receiver 8 with 17.2 points per game. Again, only in 11 games because of the fact that he was suspended down the stretch for performance-enhancing drugs or some sort of substance abuse issue with the Houston Texans. We still don't really know what that issue was. However, again, on a points per game basis, through the first 11 weeks of the season, back when we had a 17-game schedule. So he missed between 5 and 6 games over that stretch. I forget when the Texans' bye week was that season. But you've got 17.2 points per game in PPR formats. That's fantastic. I think that if Amari Cooper gave us those level of numbers and finished as a low-end wide receiver 1, we'd all be very happy. And I think that the skill set comps are similar as well. Both Will Fuller and Amari Cooper are phenomenal athletes, ability to stretch the field on the sideline and press the defense vertically. And Cooper is fantastic at back shoulder fades, running savvy routes. He's a very clean and crisp route runner. What I would just say about him is that psychologically, I don't think he's an alpha. So I think that he's not a guy like Cooper Kupp who's going to go after it every single play, or a Devontae Adams and try to absolutely kill the defense. But he is a guy who, if he's open and gets the ball put on time and on target, will catch the pass. And if he gets out in space, has that athleticism to break a tackle or two and get out in space running for some really, really great numbers. But again, the concern is the suspension, the 0-100 receiving or 100 reception seasons, 0-10+ touchdown seasons, which he's going to need to put up probably 8 or 9+ TDs to have a wide receiver 1 finish this year. And then, of course, the rust with Deshaun Watson. How quickly will he be able to replicate who he was pre-holdout with Houston? That'll be something interesting to take a peek at as well. Zeke here is the last player I want to talk about. So 2 Cowboys and a former Cowboy of the 5 players in today's episode. So that's all very interesting stuff. What's crazy to me, excuse me, As a player who is, again, a late 4th round draft pick, his ADP is 42.1. One more time, again, that is via Underdog Fantasy's best ball ADP. His ADP should be a little bit higher in traditional redraft formats where you're setting your lineup every week, because I think that he will provide a phenomenal level of consistent production, especially if he's replicating the role of your running back 2 or even your running back 3 by the time that he comes off the board to you in your fantasy leagues this season. So what's insane, totally absurd to me, is that in the last draft I did, the last 2022 redraft format league that I did, he was the 20th running back selected off the board, taken after guys like Breece Hall. James Cook went really close to him, which I thought was ridiculous, although he does have a lot of upside. And I see a very real scenario here where Ezekiel Elliott can kind of scratch and claw his way to just having enough volume to be a low-level running back 1 producer, that being a top 12 running back off the board when he's being drafted between that 18 and 20 range, which I think is absurd and, again, ridiculous, because this is not a guy who you expect to walk onto the field and win a given week for you. But Zeke is 1,000% a guy who can go out there and give you touches on a week-to-week basis, give you volume. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier with the whole Ceedee Lamb Dallas Cowboys passing game situation, where they saw their passing attempts increase and their rushing attempts pull back down the stretch last year. But you had 20.25 touches per game, which is very, very good volume, in weeks 1 through 4 before Zeke injured his PCL. After those weeks, he had about 15.5 touches per game. So you're talking about a 4.5 to roughly 5 touch per game decrease in volume, again, on a per game basis. And then I took a look at Tony Pollard. Pre-Zeke injury, hit 11.25 touches per game. Post-injury, hit 11.27 touches per game. So 0.02 is the increase in volume that Tony Pollard saw down the stretch of the year once Ezekiel Elliott was injured, which to me is very telling. He's a lot more efficient than Zeke. He's a lot more explosive. But he is still the lead back. He's still the guy they're using on the goal line. 50 red zone touches, and 12 of those being on the goal line last year, ranked 5th in the NFL. So even though he's not super efficient, he's not going to give you flashy numbers, he's not going to go out and completely crush it, dominate your week, and win it for you, he's a guy you can depend on to get you valuable touches. Again, 50 in the red zone. That's prime time territory. It takes 1 carry to get 6 points. If you're getting, those goal line opportunities, again, 1 carry to get 6 points. And you're talking about a player who still limped his way to a 1,000-yard season despite having a torn PCL, which was aggravating him the entire season, and he suited up, gridironed or warriored his way through, the gridiron last year and had a 1,000-yard year and still played 65.9% of the snap share, which is still a very impressive marker to be at, and that ranks top 10 in the league. So you're getting a guy who gets volume. At the end of the day, volume is incredibly valuable in itself. Efficiency will tell you how good or how bad a player is at times. But something that I didn't necessarily give Zeke the benefit of the doubt for last year that I want to kind of revert back on here is the context. And the context in this situation is the PCL. How big of a factor was the PCL? I'm not sure if we'll necessarily get an answer to that right away. Zeke is entering his age 27 season. Traditionally, we shouldn't have a problem with that. He is a guy who has seen his yards per carry decline each season since his rookie year. That's a bit troubling, but the offensive line has arguably regressed each season as well. He's had injuries. He's had a suspension. He's had other issues that have factored into his fantasy roles, his fantasy situations, his fantasy finishes that I haven't personally been giving him enough credit for, I think, in terms of how that's impacted him here. And again, by no means am I saying that Zeke should be considered a league-winning player here, but the value is too strong. You can get a staple week-in, week-out running back producer here in the late 4th round of drafts that you should not be able to get this late. His ADP should be higher. If his ADP does rise and the value is no longer there, I will be out on Zeke. But at this point in time, with how the draft board is structured, sign me up 24/7, 365 in redraft formats to be scooping up Zeke for the 2022 season as a standalone value. I love the opportunity that we've got here. So those are 5 players that I think are must-haves here, again, in the early rounds 1 through 4 of 2022 fantasy football leagues. If you enjoyed today's video, drop down, click that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. Turn the bell on so you're not late for an episode. Go check out SFS on Twitter, @SizzleFantasy. I'm sure you've probably seen the graphic pop up at least a couple times. Oops, bumped the at the desk here. I'm sure you've seen that pop up a couple times throughout today's video, but we're trying to grow that community and obviously expand into other spaces here. Again, subscribe, you guys. Helps us out a lot. Comment if you've got any questions, thoughts, concerns, opinions, takes, whatever it is. I'm happy to get back to you. I love talking fantasy, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.